Hey, welcome back. It's your boy Will J. Let's get into some deck brewing shenanigans. We're closing out our Dominaria United Precon challenge with our 4th video, and if you're just joining us, we have built 4 new alternate precons, secret precons if you will, on top of the official releases. We've already covered Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief, Maria Scholar of Antiquity, and Rada Drobic of Urborg, and if any of those interest you, be sure to check them out. These precons are designed with specs just like the official precons we're used to getting every set, which means we're trying to use some new cards from DMU, we have certain deck building guideline restrictions, and we are definitely leaving room for upgrades. But quote-unquote out of the box, these 4 decks should make for a good play experience when facing off against each other. And just like our previous videos, I'm tearing the fabric of reality here for a second and really pretending that these are going to be released, so again, I hope you could humor me on this. Our 4th precon features the legendary human berserker Garna, Bloodfist of Keld, and her deck Violence and Valor. Be ready for lots of aggression, lots of death, and as the name says, lots of violence. Let's open the box and check out what we're getting. First, let's talk about our commander. Garna is a 4-mana value 4/3 human berserker with a very unique ability. Whenever another creature we control dies, we get to draw a card if it was attacking. So she's a value engine or card draw engine out of the combat step. However, if the creature wasn't attacking, Garna deals 1 damage to each opponent, so she's also a pinger. Violence and Valor is a deck that deals in death, where all these sacrifices are for the honorable cause of our victory. Creatures dying fuels its card draw and also its win con. So while I will unpack for us our usual themes of ramp, removal, and draw, I'll also go over the other themes the precon provides us, namely fodder, recycle, ping, and something we like to call UBP or utilities, bombs, and pets. Black and Red doesn't have the most reliable ramp suite, so it's no surprise that Violence and Valor leans heavily into artifact ramp. There's the usual Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, and after we get some tapped 2-drop rocks in the Diamond series, Charcoal and Fire. And we also get a Cold Steel Heart which can tap for either color. Mind Stone and Felwar Stone are 2-drop rocks that come in untapped, but since the deck needs creatures to die, Burnished Heart is a 3-drop that can sacrifice itself to search out 2 basics. And Solemn Simulacrum is a commander classic that searches out a basic when it enters the battlefield, and it draws us a card when it dies. Speaking of death triggers, Impulsive Pilferer, Shambling Ghast, and Riveter's Requisitioner are all cheap creatures who ramp us when they die. And some of the premier ramp spells in this deck is Mahadi Emporium Master, which can churn out a bunch of treasures for us when our deck gets going, and the chase card of the deck, which is Pitiless Plunderer. It reads, whenever a creature we control dies, we create a treasure token. It's all sorts of broken, and this card is key to unlocking the deck's hidden combo potential if you wish to upgrade it. The removal suite is fairly light in Violence and Valor, and it's mainly focused on creatures. Spark Harvest is a sack outlet that lets you blow up a creature or a planeswalker, and Yavimaya Steel Crusher can sacrifice itself to destroy an artifact. Outside of those though, you're gonna have to rely on player removal to deal with the troublesome non-creature permanents. Flashback Marauder forces sacrifices for all players, and Stronghold Assassin is a sack outlet that can destroy a creature, albeit non-black ones only. Phyrexian Plague Lord is yet another sack outlet that gives -1/-1, and Butcher of Malakir is probably our strongest form of removal, with the sheer volume of creatures we hope will be dying from our side of the battlefield. Blasphemous Act is a staple sweeper that belongs in every red deck, and it has a home here as well. Garna is a scary draw engine, and Violence and Valor is terrific at refueling our hand. Skull Clamp though is a nice money card in the deck, and it lets us draw 2 for killing our 1 toughness creatures. Deadly Dispute is one of my favorite cards, and it lets us draw 2 and create a treasure for sacrificing a creature. Grimhara Specs watches out for our non-token creatures to die, drawing us a card each time, and Smothering Abomination has a somewhat similar effect, drawing us a card whenever we sacrifice a creature. With Garn out, we essentially draw twice now whenever a creature of ours is sacrificed in the combat step. Gibbering Barricade is a sack outlet from Dominaria United, which also lets us draw a card, and Skullport Merchant is also a draw sack outlet that we can feed creatures or treasures into. And Culling Dice, I don't know how to pronounce this, is a sack outlet that we can cash in later for a big burst draw effect. We obviously want a lot of things dying, and fodder is the perfect way to power that game plan. Ghoulish Procession gives us a Decayed Zombie token whenever any non-token creature dies. And because of how Decayed works, when it sacrifices itself at end of combat, it's still considered attacking since you haven't left the combat phase yet. And so with Garna out, this draws you a card. Sifter of Skulls cares about our non-token creatures dying, giving us a 1/1 Eldrazi sign token into play. And while these are flexible enough to give us mana, they can also just sacrifice themselves to either ping our opponents, or attack first and then sacrifice themselves to draw us a card. Ogre Slumlord is a 5-drop that creates a 1/1 rat whenever any other non-token creature dies. And while the rats can't sacrifice themselves, the deck thankfully gives us plenty of other ways to do so. Gut True Soul Zealot is a 3-drop 2/2 that acts like a sack outlet whenever we attack, and it also refunds us with a 4/1 skeleton with Menace that's also tapped and attacking. So technically, we can attack with any random creature, sacrifice that attacking creature to Gut's ability, which will then trigger Garna to draw us a card. Then after combat damage is dealt, we can still sacrifice that attacking 4/1 skeleton that we just made using some other sack outlet, and that too will draw us another card. So just so many synergies and flexibility here. Endrixar Master Breeder is a 5-drop that's a quick way to produce lots of tokens for us, and Jax's the Troublemaker lets us create a token copy of any other creature we control, and before you balk at the discard cost of the ability, remember that when the token dies, it draws us a card, and when it's sacrificed during the combat step, Garna's ability will let us draw a card off of that too. Emrakul's Hatcher is a 5-drop 3/3 that enters with 3 0/1s that can sacrifice themselves for mana, Angrath Captain of Chaos to make zombie tokens while also making our creatures hard to block, Rakshasa Debaser yoinks a creature from our opponent's graveyard whenever it attacks, and Sat's Will is an instant that can force sacrifices from our opponent while also making us a bunch of 0/1 thralls to sacrifice later on. Lastly, Elturel Survivors has Myriad. And yes, while the +X+0 can make it a huge beater, the Myriad also gives us extra sacrifice fodder in combat when it creates copies of itself for each opponent we have. Fodder is great, but we'll likely need some non-tokens to sacrifice, and Recycle gives us a bunch of creatures or effects that we can use to do it over and over again. Cult Conscript is a sneaky good card from Dominaria United, and I suggest you get one today. It's a 1-drop that can bring itself back from the graveyard at the low cost of just 2 mana. Phoenix Chick is a flying hasty creature that can be brought back if we're attacking with 3 or more creatures. Pyreheart Wolf is a 3-drop with Undying, so it can be sacrificed twice, but its static ability can also make our creatures hard to block. And speaking of Undying, well, Undying Evil gives any creature of ours Undying, bringing it back from the graveyard with a +1/+1 counter. A Kicked Balduvian Atrocity lets us recycle a creature that already died before, and Whisper Blood Liturgist is a sack outlet that brings any creature of ours back from the graveyard. While the Ever-Efficient Victimize is a sack outlet that brings 2 creatures back to the battlefield, ready to be sacrificed again. Rescue from the Underworld is an instant speed sacrifice outlet that brings the sacrificed creature and another creature back to the battlefield. And Champion of Stray Souls is a repeatable reanimator, although its ability cost is a bit steep to activate. Drawing a lot of cards is a lot of fun, but we don't want to just spin our wheels. Pinging our opponents is one of the legit win cons of Violence and Valor. Agent of the Iron Throne inflicts pain whenever a creature of ours dies, or when an artifact dies, like when we sacrifice a treasure. Zulaport Cutthroat is a classic aristocrat piece, pinging our opponents for 1 whenever a creature of ours dies and can end games if left unchecked. And Falkenrath Noble drains a single player for 1 whenever any creature dies. Mayhem Devil cares about players sacrificing things, and the damage can add up quickly even if this devil only hits 1 target at a time. Calculating Lich has a snowball effect, making sure any creature controlled by any player, as long as it's attacking one of our opponents, already drains the defending player for 1. Fling is like the Omega Ping. It's a sack outlet that can also hit for a bunch if a creature has pretty decent power. And Warlock class, if it reaches level 3, is a finisher. It doubles up the life loss of our opponents, which can be devastating when the ping damage begins to add up. For UBP, Violence and Valor already has its fair share of sacrifice outlets, but you can never seem to have too much. Viscera Seer lets us sack a creature without paying any costs, as does Blood Throne Vampire. Meanwhile, Ragefire Hellkite is a sack outlet too, but when it attacks, and the double strike is nice as an extra means of dealing more damage. Braids Arisen Nightmare is a new card from Dominaria United, and you'll likely end up drawing a bunch from Braids, but it's also possible that you end up just thinning the herd, which is nice when you have a lot of fodder to offer Braids. Some extra bombs, Mob Rule is a cheaper costed insurrection that isn't quite as game-ending, but it can still present lethal. And Warhost Frenzy is a neat combat trick that can surprise KO an opponent who doesn't care about a bunch of attacking 0/1s from your side. Lastly, there's Anger, just a great addition to this deck that wants to stay aggressive, even if the aggression isn't for dealing damage but for gaining card advantage. Let's check out how Violence and Valor stacks up against our playability matrix. If you're curious to hear more about this, I go more in depth on it in our Rethinking Power Levels video, but for offense, this is a really consistent deck. And the thing holding me back from giving this a complete S is that it doesn't have tutors, which is perfectly reasonable considering it's a Precon, and so you don't want to burden new players with having to choose what card to get. But the card draw is plenty, and the game plan is completely focused. You'll likely always have a sack outlet, and you'll likely always be able to refuel your hand. The efficiency though is just okay. Not the most efficiently costed cards in the deck, there are some tapped mana rocks as well. I mean, it can snowball, and it snowballs hard, but it needs multiple turns to be able to set up, and with many of its payoffs being costed in the 3 to 5 drop range, I think this is the appropriate rating. For the quality of our win con, pinging is cute, and in the right conditions, it can kill a table in short order, but can also take a while to like just jab an opponent to death. So net, it gets a decent score for quality. Overall, this Precon's offense is something I'd rate at a B, but it feels like a high B given how focused it already is. Definitely a dangerous deck out of the box. For defense, there are some interaction pieces, but not a whole bunch. Getting a permanent base type of removal in Butcher of Malakir is nice, and I guess there are some shaky defensive pieces like Death Touch Rats and all this, but a barely passable score at consistency here. For efficiency though, there's a bunch of conditional removal as well. Most of them attached to creatures or needing sacrifices, or they're done at sorcery speed. And so the whole defensive foundation of the deck is fairly shaky. Blasphemous Act costed it as a 1-drop isn't enough to save the deck's efficiency score for me. And finally, coverage-wise, it mainly deals with creatures only, which means once it needs to deal with like non-creature permanents, the deck is gonna face an uphill battle. Overall, I'd grade this Precon's defense at a D. Putting it all together, Balance and Valor is an explosive Precon deck that I encourage you to pilot in mid-power casual pods. And that's it for this episode. Phew! We made it! Balance and Valor's deck list should be available in the description down below, and I hope you can show some support by tapping that like button and subscribing as well. You can also check out the other builds of our other Dominaria United secret precons on our channel, and speaking of which, I'm still trying to sort out the logistics to be able to record a game so that you guys can see these 4 decks in action against each other. I already have my eye on which one I'll be piloting, but hey, it'd be fun to hear in the comments which build caught your eye the most. Hopefully I'll be back with a gameplay video, but until then, stay inspired friends, and I'll see you next time.